I'm Patrice, and I'd like to welcome you to Coaching Conversations with Patrice and Liz. It's the sixth one, it's our sixth podcast. And this is the end. This is the last podcast on trauma informed, um, how we look at this family that we're talking about. I'm sad about that, but I'm so excited about the information that we have been able to present to you and excited to hear how you will be using that in your team meetings or, as you talk together or by yourself, how you contemplate the information that you've gotten and what you'll do with that. Um, it's been a wonderful time being able to meet with you, prepare for this, learn myself even a lot of the information, and then apply it to this family. I think that's one of the more difficult things. You can learn a lot, but sometimes it takes a little work. And how do I apply it to the work that I do? So thank you for being with us, and sit back because we got a whole lot more. And again, what we're trying to do with this is provide ways in which you can use this as a continuation with your other trainings, hiring information, and how to work with families, how to recognize, how to name, and how to heal from your traumas, from helping the families to do that, but even the traumas we pick up. How do we heal from that? We're just as important. And the work that we do is so important, so difficult, so intense that we need to know how to do that too. And just enjoy. Okay, Liz.
As Patrice said, yeah, this is our sixth one. It feels like we've done six, but maybe just one. It's a little mix of everything. We've gone over a lot. We've done, we've had conversations on attachment trauma and developmental trauma, um, what stewardship looks like, especially when it comes to a family experiencing this type of crisis. We spent 2 episodes talking about stabilization techniques and what does that look like and how to know when you're in or out of your window so that you can be the best for the family. And like Patrice said, we've gone along, this kind of journey of exploring trauma under the glasses of an FA is just as important. And the work starts within yourself and for yourself before you can even hold yourself to a standard of how you're going to be with families. That prioritizing yourself is not bad, that recognizing your burnout is not bad, that there's no shame in any of these natural processes of being a helper and being in this sort of field. So of course, we would love for everyone to watch every single episode and indulge in us for 6 hours. But if you're just watching one or a few of them, that gives you a little bit of an idea of what the other ones may talk about that you may want to check out. And as we start moving into this, Mara, you're going to kick us off with kind of understanding what recovery is going to look like in general, and then also when we talk about this family, and kind of what growth and resilience looks like at this part of the stage and understanding trauma.
Yeah, so just a reminder that we're going to be talking about Agnes and her family. And so first, I'm going to give an overall sense of what post-traumatic growth looks like, what are some of the factors that increase resilience, and then we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what might that look like for this family specifically, and also what might be some of the challenges with this family and programmatically to being able to see this sort of best case scenario come to fruition. So I'm just echoing what both of you said. It feels like we've covered a lot of ground, and it also feels like we've only scratched the surface. There's so much, even in just understanding trauma and trauma-informed care. The more that I learn, the more that I realize we don't know, the more I realize I don't know. And this is such an exciting space of research and practice. And so I hope that this has further piqued curiosity. I know these are conversations that have happened many times before within your spaces, but I hope this deeper dive has just sparked some curiosity around what might I want to continue to learn and how do I want to continue to grow. So we'll talk more about that at the end, and sort of what that looks like as you continue to deepen in this process. So just kind of a recall back to our last conversation. We talked about Herman's 3 stages. If you don't know what I'm talking about, if you're just joining us, at least go back and take a look at the handouts from the last episode, because you can see this model laid out and understand what I'm talking about. But Judith Herman, psychiatrist and a pioneer in the field of trauma research and practice, gave us this 3-stage model for trauma recovery. And today we're really going to be focusing on that last stage, that reconnection work, right? After families and individuals have really been able to find some stable ground, have been able to reprocess what's happened to them, make sense of what's happened to them, and are moving into this space of wanting to reconnect, right? Wanting to, and feeling like they have the capacity to take more risks, to connect with others, to build new relationships. What is that? What's the possibility for long-term recovery for people? One of the areas of study that I'm most interested in is post-traumatic growth. So I'll refer you to the handout for today, and you can take a look at, the definition of post-traumatic growth, get a better understanding for what I'm talking about. But I really want us to just understand that trauma does not always mean that people got a kitty cat again.
Oh, he's the worst. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I think it's
I even have the dog on my lap to keep him away, and all of a sudden he doesn't care about Milo and they're friends or something.
So I think often when we think about trauma, we have this, really this dread feeling, oh, trauma, people have been traumatized. It's so horrible, right?
Mhm.
We're just there. Of course, it's a negative thing that usually happens in someone's life, right? These are markers of pain and suffering. But that's not the whole story, right? For many people, surviving really challenging things, going through life altering change, having to make new sense of the possibility of pain and suffering, right? That the reality that we all will have to face some pain and suffering in our lives, and facing that head on and doing that skillfully, having the resources, having the support, having the skills internally and having the resources externally to get through that. We often see that people grow from those experiences. So at the end of a therapeutic process with a client where they've had that magic combination, right? They've had the right amount of support from their community, support from their family or friends, support from me as their therapist, support from advocates like the FAs that you all work with. When they've had that right combination and they feel like they've been able to skillfully move through the impact, I often hear people say things like, I don't think I would take back what happened because it got me where I'm at, and I wouldn't know my own resilience. I wouldn't understand myself in the deep and intimate ways that I do. I wouldn't have this deep spiritual connection with the world around me and with the people around me. I wouldn't appreciate the stability and happiness that I have today if it weren't for what happened, right? And I'm always really cautious about, I don't ever like put this out there for people like, oh, you should be grateful that these things happen to you because look how strong you are, because of course that's not my place, and B, not everyone's going to feel that way. And importantly, because of dynamics of privilege and dynamics of different people's intersecting identities and what kind of access they might have to these types of resources, not everyone is going to even have access to this type of healing that we're talking about, right? But the hope is that we can create communities and we can create circumstances where everyone does, because trauma is not the end of the story, right? It can just be a piece of the story for people. So research on post-traumatic growth shows us that when these healing factors come together in this way, that we do see increases in these 5 areas: appreciation of life, relationships with others are improved, there's a sense of new possibilities. Often people will sort of have like a second um, a second lease on life, right? A new sense of how they want to live their lives, and seeing totally new possibilities for how they might spend their time, right? Um, a real strong sense of personal strength, especially that sense of self efficacy that comes out of, whoa, this thing that I did not think I would survive, I did. Right. This thing that I thought I could never face, that I never, not only did I live through it and it was terrifying, but I have talked about it and made sense of it, and I can now share it with others. And I feel this really grounded sense of strength within myself, right? When I do. And the fifth being spiritual change, right? So that doesn't have to be within a religious context, but there's this sense of spiritual health and growth that comes out of facing what's most difficult and getting through it and thriving, right? So, post traumatic growth is the hope for everyone, right? It's not the reality for everyone right now, but it's the hope and possibility when we do reduce barriers, when we do focus on building resilience factors, building protective factors for people, when we address some of the systemic issues like racism and sexism and classism and all of these pieces that get in the way of people being able to have that possibility, that's the change that we can create, right? That's the possibility. So I want to talk a little bit about, okay, so how do you get there, right? Because I'm imagining many people are thinking, well, especially with our family we've been talking about, they face a lot of these barriers, right?
Mhm.
And it can be easy to think, oh, they're just never going to get there, right? And I notice for me, my own bias is with my clients who have a lot of access and a lot of privilege, if the work feels a lot easier, right? I don't have to address any barriers. And that can bias me towards putting more of my resources there, right? If I'm not paying attention to that, I may think there's not a whole lot I can do over here, right? There's too many barriers. It's overwhelming for me. I feel powerless. I feel stuck. And so unintentionally, unconsciously, I'm moving my focus to the clients, the families where there's less barriers and more possibility for that post-traumatic growth. So we have to pay
Yeah.
attention to that and know that even with this family that has all these dynamics that are very outside of their control and our control, there are some pieces that we can focus on to help them build some of those protective factors and increase the resilience of the children for sure, the family overall, and increase the possibility of this long-term growth. I imagine both Patrice and Liz, you all have lots of conversations with FAs about resilience, right? And the risk and protective factors for families. And a lot of the work that the FAs are doing is around building those protective factors, right? Building protective environments. I think it's called, after so many times of hearing it, I'm still not sure I'm saying it right, but is it circles of safety?
Circle of security.
Circle of security. Okay. So that whole concept is built around how do we build these protective factors for people, right? How do we increase resilience by building protective factors? So calling your attention to the back side of that handout that you have, we talk about resilience. Usually when we're talking about resilience and the study of resilience, it's very focused on children, right? Building resilience in children. That doesn't mean that that's the end of the story. For me, working with adult clients, I'm focusing on the same things. I'm focusing on building resilience, right? The earlier we can intervene, the more likely we are to see really strong long-term outcomes, right? So with our younger children, the children that are in your programs, there's a lot of hope for building that resilience. but we never stop having neuroplasticity. We never stop having the possibility of growth and change, right? So these resilience factors also apply to the older children in this family, to Candace, to Quinn, and to Agnes, and to, you know, Jorge, and to all these family members, anyone that we can impact, right? So some of the protective factors that we know will decrease the risk for negative long-term outcomes. When we think back to the ACEs study, if we want to decrease some of those adverse health effects that we see later in life, people need support, right? So building support systems, building long-term sustaining support systems for people. People need resources, right? It's really hard to thrive when we're not resourced, when we don't have a safe place to live, and when we don't have, you know, safe community and a good stable schooling and all of these things. So we need support, we need resources. These are key. We need a felt sense of safety, right? So thinking about, especially for kiddos where home may not be safe, and home maybe is never going to be safe for some people, what are the other pockets of safety that you can help promote in their lives, right? Is there a boys and girls club that they can go to where they will find their pocket of safety? Is there a teacher that they feel really connected to that you can help strengthen that as an outlet? Maybe you can help address some of the barriers that come up for parents that might feel threatened by a kiddo seeking safety outside of the home, right? But thinking about where can this child go and experience a felt sense of safety? Because later on, they're going to be able to call upon that experience as a resilience factor, right? And I often am working with clients in their adult lives, trying to help them establish an internal sense of safety. For people that have never had it, it's much harder to access. We have to spend a lot more time even trying to understand what might it feel like, right? What does safety even mean? But I've got countless stories of clients who I say, I want you to think about a safe person or a safe place. And what does that represent? And they say, you know what? The weirdest thing, what came to mind for me was this teacher I had when I was in 4th grade, right? And it's strange. I haven't thought about her in years, but she was just so kind to me and was always there to listen. And she felt so safe, right? So as FAs, you have this opportunity to potentially be that safe space for someone, right? But a felt sense of safety and experience of safety, the more we have that, the more resilient we can be to stress and trauma, right? A positive sense of self, right? Our self-concept so impacts the way we experience adversity, right? If we believe this is my fault, I'm the reason this is happening, that can have pretty devastating impacts on the way we relate to ourselves, right? The way we relate to the world, our willingness to ask for help, our willingness to mobilize resources. We may not even have personal permission to do those things. So being able to help kiddos build a positive sense of self, helping parents reinforce the strengths that they see in their kids, right? These are really important protective factors. Building a sense of self-efficacy, right? Believing I can do hard things. When we believe we can do hard things, we do hard things, right? And we don't spend as much time avoiding things that feel scary, and we can take risks and we can grow and move through things. So helping people build that positive sense of self, that sense of self-efficacy, and a sense of meaning in their experience, right? Many times I see parents avoid talking to children about hard things. They think, I don't want to stress them out. They're too young to understand what's going on. So, I think about our case family here, and this big traumatic incident has happened, and it could be really tempting to say, we're not going to talk about it, right? We're going to avoid the conversation because it's too scary and overwhelming. The reality is, though, that the scary, overwhelming thing happened, right? And now, as adults, it's our job to help kids make meaning out of it. What did that mean? Right? What does that mean in the context of our lives? Why did that happen? Right? Is it going to happen again? what are some of the reasons that one might feel like hurting themselves, right? What was it like for you to see that? How did you experience that? So even with the youngest kiddo, being able to try to help them move through it, they can play, reenact it, or just talk about it, but help them make meaning out of it.
Mhm.
And then the last two, I think, are really the nuts and bolts of some of what we've talked about these last few weeks. But having talents, having skills, and having flexible coping skills that can be applied to lots of situations are huge resilience factors for people, right? So as outside people that are not as enmeshed in the trauma and stress of the family, we can help introduce opportunities for kiddos to learn some skills, right? To learn
Mhm.
things that will feel special to them and help them build that sense of I'm important and I know how to do things, right? And
Right.
these, we want talents and skills that are outside of the realm of just coping, right? We want to be good at something, and that builds that sense of self. But we also want to know what to do when something scary happens, right? When I feel overwhelmed or when I feel scared, what are my coping skills, right? So these are the protective factors that research shows over and over again are going to increase the likelihood that children can be more resilient through stressful situations, and that we can see that possibility of post-traumatic growth realized, right? So I want to talk a bit about what that looks like for providers, but let's incorporate that a bit into the family, because there are a few factors here that providers can influence, and I
Mhm.
want to talk about what that can look like for the family. So just as I'm talking, I'm wondering for the two of you what came up in thinking about what does success look like for this family. We've got 6 months left with this family. They're very clearly in crisis in this moment. And what does success look like over the next 6 months for this family? What comes to mind?
I know for me, the first, like the thing that I really locked on to for this family when thinking about, if I was the FA, it would be really easy and very understandable to feel hopeless with this family because this is a huge thing. And like you mentioned, Mara, a lot of different factors that they would need to overcome, even just outside of the crisis that occurred. And so for me, I'm thinking of these protective factors they were talking about, and we can't expect ourselves to do all of them or help or fix all of them. So if I was an FA and I had to kind of narrow down on, okay, where could I have effect? I think our FAs need to be thinking about what their own strengths are and what that relationship looks like. But also just, what you're the most comfortable bringing out of someone and start there. So I think for me with this family, I think it's kind of non-negotiable. You need to either start with the safety, like safety and coping skills, like something, there needs to be some safe baseline here. And multiple people in the family, they need those coping skills. And I bet that they're willing to receive at least something, after that sort of crisis. So I would start there. And then I think my next step would definitely be a sense of self, helping mom see beyond, just her trauma or just, mistakes she may be holding on to that she's deemed as mistakes and that she, holds against herself, helping her see past those, release those, and then helping each person in the family have that stronger sense of self that isn't, even if you just look at like the boyfriend, stepdad, for him, if he's putting so much emphasis on I could be a hero stepdad, now he's missing the point. And his sense of self needs to be more developed than that. So for each person, there's a way and an in that I would take with that.
I agree totally with everything Liz said. I don't know how much more I could add to it, but I think that the fact that the family is still there, you're
Yeah.
still able to be a part of the family. They didn't get scared because all of this drama was playing out in front of you, and now they're embarrassed or they're upset or they're scared. about who might come in. Maybe somebody might take my kids away because you saw all of this. But the relationship that they have with the family advocate is strong enough that it can withstand the family advocate peering in and being able to see some of the ugly stuff that we all want to hide, that we don't want anyone to see. And I think that's important, that this advocate has become that important to the family, that they didn't just call and say, we don't want you anymore, or they just don't answer the door or the Zoom call or any of that.
Right.
It's strong enough to withstand that. Now, what do we do with that? How do we respect that? How do we honor that? Would be the next question. And I think that the family advocates have to see the role. You know, an important person in a person's life who has struggled is so key to how you have said, how we've talked, to how they continue to move forward. When you got somebody in your life who believes in you, sees the good in you where you might not have been able to see it, or family members have not been able to see it, but if they see you seeing it, that's important to who they will become. And I think, yeah, they that probably plays a big role. And if they just feel like you believe in them, even just that much, that could be that much in their life, to who they think of themselves, how they hold themselves, and how they look at what they want to be, is that somebody believed in me that much. So I believe also on our side as advocates, even this much success, we need to honor that and speak about them and talk to them about it. Wow, look at what you've done. Look at what you've accomplished, that they can advocate for their family. And the other thing is, you know, they came to us surviving. They had survival skills, and they had the wherewithal to look us up, to bring us into their home, whether it be they chose it, a doctor recommended, somebody referred them, they still followed through. That shows a lot about who they are as people.
Yeah.
And the fact that they stay with us for any length of time, whether they stay until they age out or they stay for a little bit of time, they've still gotten something from us. That's necessary. And when they do leave, they're taking what they got from us and all those survival skills to continue on. So they don't come to us. And we shouldn't look at them as broken. These are people who've made it long before they ever got into our lives and will probably make it. So we need to even change our perspective and how we look at the people that come to us also.
Yeah, Patrice is absolutely right. And then in the case that this family goes, okay, maybe the FA's not the bad guy. Let's keep our openness with them. Let's finish up these last 6 months. Even in that case, there is that part of success in this family. It looks like you used your relationship. You helped them develop safety. You didn't expect yourself to fix or save them and check all the boxes. And I think that that's just as important if this family would have decided to discontinue our services. Because I think an FA would be like, oh, I did something wrong. They didn't come back. They thought I wouldn't care after crisis. There's so many avenues for us to blame ourselves in that situation. But I think what success would look like if this family didn't continue would be what Patrice is mentioning, even if it's this small, looking back, really analyzing the moments of growth that they did have, and knowing that just because a crisis happened, they didn't lose that. That's still going to follow them. That's still something that's going to be in their mind. Something that could come up like, oh, this one time, we used to do this in this service, and the FA said to me this, and it stuck with me. So even in a situation of crisis where maybe that does terminate care before we're ready, before you've had a healthy goodbye, before you've been able to, mediate the crisis you saw, there's still success in that case. there's still success in the work that you did and the work you put in up until, an abrupt termination.
So much of what you both just touched on relates to some of these influence factors for providers. So I want to go through each of them, but I imagine that you'll want to encourage them to take a quick break. So I will.
Yes. So now would be a great time for you to capitalize on staring at our faces and talk a little bit amongst yourselves, or journal a bit if you're going through this by yourself, whatever your process is if you're doing this alone, about what is the role for an FA in the long-term healing of this family, and what might you look for, and how might you define success for this family. But we're going to keep going and be lucky enough to listen to Mara while you get to just stare at us.
So I imagine that a lot of these things the FAs are already doing. This is already a space where there's a lot of strength to continue to build on with your teams. But the first piece for providers, and I heard both of you touch on this, is establishing a strong alliance, right? That every thing that comes after, all of the teaching, all of the skill building, even your ability to help people see their own strength, relies on the strength of the relationship, right? And so, we were having a conversation before recording, and it was mentioned, that there's sometimes this sense of, okay, you're not part of this family, right? This is a professional relationship. There's this boundaried relationship, and boundaries are really important, especially with trauma, right? I mean, we need to make sure that there's boundaries, because boundaries create safety. However, there also needs to be a strong connection, a strong alliance, a real sense of, a felt sense of empathy, a felt sense that you care, of compassion, right? Yes. And all of us pick up non-verbally on these things, right? That's the tricky thing, is that we as providers have to actually feel it. We have to actually find what we enjoy about the people we're working with, even when they're challenging, right? Mm-hmm. Because I can say whatever, right thing it is to say, but if you don't feel it in me, if you don't have a felt sense and you don't believe it from me, there isn't a foundational relationship to carry that through, right? So establishing that strong alliance and working, I think about our case family that we're talking about. There's been a rupture, even if there was a really good alliance prior to this experience. Coming into the home, witnessing this traumatic incident, potentially having to report that incident to DCFS, even just the awkward sense that's coming up for the family, that you kind of saw their dirty laundry, right? You saw what it looks like when things aren't so pretty. That's going to it's going to be a tear in the relationship. But intimacy and relationship is built in the repair, right? So actually, through conflict, through difficulty, and then repairing that, we can build a strong therapeutic reliance. We can build a strong advocacy relationship. I often see my best client work come after some kind of rupture, right? After something happens and my client comes in and says, I was really mad at you last week, or I really didn't like when you said this thing, right? And I can model a capacity to take feedback. I can model a capacity to be humble and say, wow, I'm so glad, A, that you felt like you could come back and tell me this, and B, that you're willing to give me this feedback so I can be more helpful, right? So that I can do my job better, because ultimately it's my job to be helpful to you. If I'm not, why are you here, right? So thinking about this family, we can build that strong alliance from this moment of rupture if handled correctly, right? If we come back in and we are genuinely curious about what it was like for Agnes, we are genuinely curious about what was happening for Candace and why she was at that point. we build, you know, consent from Agnes on down to be able to have these difficult conversations. We don't avoid the conversation, but we also don't come in prepared to tell them about themselves or how they should be or what should be different about them or what they need to do, right? That we first come in and say, we've got to reestablish some connection, safety, security within the relationship, right? So that's first and foremost always is establishing that strong alliance in the relationship, right? From that, then we want to be able to identify the strengths, right? If you are coming in from a deficit perspective, if you are coming in and looking for what needs to change, what's wrong, right? And that's your come from place, people will feel that, and that will come through in how you're approaching them, right? It's going to damage the alliance. It's also going to undermine some of these protective factors we talked about. It's going to undermine that their sense of self-efficacy. It's going to undermine their sense of being skillful, right? It's going to undermine a positive sense of self. So you've got to be able to identify strengths. Even in approaching what happened with Candace, there are probably a lot of strengths that you could observe in the situation, right? Somehow Candace has done this in front of her family and she's welcoming them into her process and what's happening for her, right? So there's some belief that if she shows people how much pain she's in, they may be able to respond, right? Many kiddos are self-harming behind closed doors and parents have no idea, right? So there's an automatic strength in that they all know what's happening, right? That there's open communication in the family and we can build on that, right? However that happened, why ever that happened, that's there now, right? We also know that Candace knows how to, you know, she's been creatively trying to figure out how to cope, right? So how do we recognize her attempts to cope as a strength and not a deficit and build on that, right? So there are lots of ways that we can even look at maybe things that look like problems,
Right.
and ask ourselves, what is the purpose of this coping strategy, or how does this function within the family, and what's the underlying strength in it, right? This family has endured a lot, and there's a lot of uh, untapped strength, right? And maybe it's that strength, but as the FA, it's your responsibility to be able to identify those things for yourself first. And part of that is also recognizing that this family, these individuals, they are the expert on their experience. You are not the expert on their experience. And you might have lost my my audio there for just a second. I'm not. Yeah, I saw a little disconnect notice, but I'm hoping I'm back now. But we really have to center that we are the experts on some things, but these individuals and this family, they are the experts on their experience. They are the experts on what they need. They are the experts on what worked for them, right? So being able to really see them as experts and notice the power dynamics in the relationship and work really hard to try to equalize those power dynamics, right? Especially if I'm coming in as a, you know, for me, I would be going in as a white person into a mixed race family, and there's automatically often a sense of this person thinks they know better because of the history of white supremacy, right? And the way that shows up now. And so really paying attention to how am I centering their expertise and identifying their strengths, right? The third piece is, how do I instill hope, right? How do I help them understand that recovery is possible even amidst all this crisis and pain? And how do I help give each individual in the family and the family as a system a sense of hope for what could be, right? What the future could look like. Being able to find practical solutions is part of that, right? So that next piece, finding practical solutions to problems, helps instill some sense of hope, some sense of self-efficacy. So thinking about, you know, oftentimes we overcomplicate things, and being able to come in and say, what do you all feel like you need? I mean, I don't have all the answers, but I've got some like network, right, of people and organizations, and we might be able to together figure out what some solutions are to these barriers that you're facing, right? So it might be, Candace has been in crisis for years. She's been suffering in silence with some things that have happened to her, and we just can't afford therapy for her, right? Oh, well, you know what? We actually have a contract with the Multicultural Counseling Center, and we can connect you with them, and we can get her a space to be able to process what's coming up and learn some of these coping skills, right? That's a pretty practical solution to what's going on. It might also be, okay, how do we connect her with some, maybe there's some kind of support group through her school that she could get engaged with. Maybe she's feeling some sense of social isolation. Without asking the family, what are the barriers, what's going on, we're not going to be able to even find those practical solutions, right? So we have to center their expertise, and then we have to think through, okay, well, what are the solutions here, right? What is it that can be done? What would you like to see done? I will often ask my clients, love asking my teenage clients, if you were the adult here, what would you do? Right? What solutions have you thought of? Because most of the time, people kind of have a sense of what they need. They just don't know how to do it, right? So then your job is then, okay, how do we creatively find these solutions? And a lot of times you won't have a solution in mind, right? Like you're gonna, yeah, that is a big problem. I don't know how to solve that. But now how am I gonna go involve my team, involve my coaches, do some consult, let my clients also see that I'm willing to do some research, and I'm willing to say, you know what, that is a hard problem. And I'm going to go do some research, and I'm going to come back and then follow through, right? And say, here's some options that I've come up with. None of them are perfect, but would any of these be helpful? Would you like me to explore any of these a little bit further for you, right? So finding those practical solutions to the problems that they are centering, not the problems you think they have, the problems that they are saying are important to them, right? Because sometimes we come in and we say, this is what needs to be addressed, and that's not where the family is at, and that's not on what their expertise is, right, on their own experience. So then we're also focusing on how do we build strengths and competencies? How do we identify those strengths and then build on them, right? So if I'm Agnes and I'm really good at, I'm on my game with my kids at dinner time, and we all sit down, we can have open conversations, but it feels really hard and chaotic to even get them together to make that happen. How do we build together on how do we make that a more regular possibility? That's where you function best. That's where you do your best parenting. How do we grow those opportunities? How do we build on what works for you? Right. So understanding the strengths and then thinking about how do we extend that out? How do we build on that? And then the last piece is fostering empowerment. And a lot of what I've already spoke to fosters that empowerment, right? Let people be the experts on their experience, giving people choices. I had a really practical example. I had a elderly client who is having a ton of issues with accessing the internet, and it sounded like a lot of them were just gaps in information, right? Not really understanding how it works. And I could have just taken over, called senior services, said, hey, I'm going to have, I've connected with this person from senior services. They're going to come out, and made her feel a sense of like, you're not competent. I'm taking over. Right. Maybe it was a practical solution, and maybe it would have been helpful, but the felt sense of it would have been me taking over because you're not competent. Right. Instead, I said, what do you feel like you need in this situation? That sounds really frustrating. It sounds like it's causing you a lot of stress. You can't see your family. I hear that that's a really big deal for you. Would it be helpful for me to try to call senior services and see if this is an option? Or would you rather have their number and call yourself? Would it be, what would be most useful? Would you rather just spend our time talking about how frustrating it is? Do you want solutions right now? I'm trying to build a sense of empowerment by saying, this is your choice. I hear what you're saying. I have some ideas for what might help. Do those sound useful to you, or is it something else that you're needing, right? So always focusing on transparency, providing all of the information that you have so that your clients can make an informed choice, and then ultimately giving the choice back to them, right? So these are the really practical things that we can do as providers, as advocates, and things that we could do with this family.
Mhm.
So want to pass it back to you both again, wondering what came up for you and just sort of how you're bringing all of these pieces together as you're thinking about what we've learned about trauma, what we've learned about stabilization and helping people learn those skills, what we've learned about long-term recovery. What does this look like long-term for this family?
I think, thank you for everything you have told us. I think that you covered a lot of information,
Right.
like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You covered the circle of security. I think what stands out for me, and you said a lot. I mean, my head's ready to blow up. You said a lot, but I think the relationship and the rupture. You know, this is 2021, and a hot minute ago, we were in 2020 with all of this pandemic, which is still here.
Mhm.
We were in the depths of it. And I think, you know, what might this family be going through? We've got a mixed race family, you know, with a lot of different people in it. You've had the earthquake, the beginning of this. You've had the pandemic. You've had
Right.
being locked down. You've had now the beginning of the year. You had the attack on the Capitol. You've got the Lives Matter, where people have been feeling either scared because of all the people who've attached themselves to that, and frightened because of that. You've had people feeling like, yes, my life matters. You've had people from
Mhm.
other countries who've said, wow, this looks just like what have gone through. And
Right.
if nobody's listening to them, why would they listen to me? And you have people who are afraid and feeling like, let me go down under the radar, which has made then family advocates wondering, what do I do? And how do I get to my families if they're afraid? If they're afraid that they can't relate to me, or just the whole everything in my world and the safety of it is gone. I see that how we help them walk through that and work through that helps to provide safety. If they've got a relationship with us that they can at least trust us, and we remembering, and that's the other thing we talk about, is that they're the experts in what they need. If we join in with them and help them through their walk, because in that circle, they're going through their path and then they're coming back. And in that walk, there's an attachment to someone that they can feel is helping them go through that. But we're also modeling to that family how you do this,
Mhm.
how you repair things. And and that's what we do. We understand you, we learn that you are the expert, but like you say also, Mar, we help provide you with the things that you need as you go around that circle, and we help you see that it is possible to repair, that you can repair. And I'm going to try to be the best example I can be out there for you, so that when you go out in your life and you do your life, that I've given you some tools to be able to do that. And I've also let you know that you're all right. You're
Yeah.
all right. And what you've done up to this point you may have been maybe operating at half capacity, you know, with what you know, but I'm here with you to help you grow to where you can
Right.
be. And then once you leave our program, I'll know that you've left with everything I could give you.
Mhm.
What you do with that is what you do with that.
Yeah.
But I've helped you. So I feel like the repair has stood out to me, because that family
Mhm.
needs to know that there is an ability to be repaired. You're not going to feel broken forever, and
Right.
that there's hope. Like you're saying, there's hope. So
Mara, you're muted.
I had some background noise. I muted it. Today's my day to be a little messy.
I hate the mute button. So
um, I just want to say that as you're work, and I think you all know this, and you probably talk about this all the time, but you're working with the young children under 3, and a lot of times they might be pre-verbal, or there's not some of these things we're talking about may feel like it doesn't apply to them, but
Right.
the most important thing for them is a safe, stable environment, right?
Mhm.
Safe, resourced caregivers, and so you have to work with the whole family system,
Mhm.
right? To be able to provide that.
Absolutely.
No way you can't.
Yeah. I just want to underscore that in what you're saying, Patrice, that, when you can teach them how to do those repairs, those are skills that then kiddo gets to see the fruits of for their life, right?
Mhm.
Those skills that you're teaching
Mhm.
parents, and that you're, those opportunities that are being instilled, those experiences, you might change the way that this family deals with stress and trauma, right? You might give them a new possibility for what that looks like.
Right. And that goes back to our understanding of attachment and developmental trauma too. If you can keep that in mind, that's why you are accessing and reaching out to the full family, is to change that path of development to help create more healthy connections and attachment bonds. That does trickle down to your little kiddo. And even though we don't get the immediate gratification of seeing, our little 2.5-year-old be like, I think it's healthy to ask for help when you need it. But, we're not going to see that from them. But you have to have some radical acceptance and take that leap of faith that because you gave those skills to the family, that means that someday those skills go to your kiddo. And that can be hard. It's hard to not necessarily be able to reap the benefits of what you sow, to just have to trust that if it's even if it's not in the next couple of years, even if it's in 10 years, this kiddo gets to learn that when they're ready to learn that, because we do teach the parents, the family, that they are the most important tool to that kiddo. They are the lifelong educator. They are, monumental. They do forever have a place. And since that's our foundation, is empowering the family in that way, you really do have to just have, just that blind faith that you've changed the trajectory for that kiddo, even though you don't get to see it.
I think one of the do change that trajectory, and this is one of the things that we work with, is when that family is going through the stuff that they're going through, and then when all the community stuff is going on, it's a frightening thing. And you might have a tendency as a parent to believe this is happening to me. And like you were saying, my kids are too young to understand this. This is really happening to me. And I think it's our job as family advocates and coaches and people who go into the home to help that person wrap their arm around that child, and
Mhm.
hopefully to help them understand it is happening to them also.
Yep.
What happens to me happens to the family. If I'm upset, my emotions are coming out and all these things are going on, even if the child can't verbalize it, can't verbalize, I'm afraid. They verbally, they can't verbalize it. They verbalize it by their behavior, because behavior has meaning. So we have to also be able to help the family recognize that your fear trickles down to them. And that would be that thing that you said that I think is important. We can't just assume that because we don't talk about it, it's not affecting the child. They're feeling
Mhm.
way. And then we can't wonder why, as they grow up in the different stages of their life, they still have that fear. It's playing its role in their lives, and it impacts how they interact with people. It impacts how they do their life. It just impacts them. So we have to help them see, help them wrap their arms around that babe, those kids, and be able to say, I get it. I get that you're afraid.
Yeah.
Maybe this behavior is about something you can't pinpoint, as all the stuff that's happened in our community and some of these things that have happened in our home. But I get it, and I can help you. And as advocates and coaches,
Mhm.
our mental health people, we can all help the advocate to help verbalize and help them understand that.
I wonder if we can just talk for a moment about what the FAs can anticipate, like what can they do with all this material that we have covered? What, how do you both see them this moving forward, and what are some of the next steps?
You
I
want to go?
think, yeah, I think one of the best things that could come specifically from this series is an ability to recognize some blind spots. You know, if you, when we're talking about this family, have a reaction of like, God, what would I do? You know, what would I do with a family like this? What would I do with, you know, those cultural components? I don't think that it's a reflection of anything bad. I don't think that it's a reflection of a bad person. I think that oftentimes, we don't know our blind spots until we're hit by them, and then you have that shock moment of like, oh my God, why don't I know this, right? And I think that this series is a really safe way to, you know, limit how much you shame yourself for it, but then also be able to start working with it and seeing your blind spots, realizing, oh, you know, I don't actually think about the, you know, the impact on development with my kiddos with trauma. I could, you know, be doing a lot in that area now that I know I wasn't thinking about it, or whatever it may be. It doesn't always have to be like the cultural components of a blind spot. So I think for me, definitely with this series, that's where an FA uses these episodes and takes it to the next step for themselves and in their development, is having that moment where it's not about shame, it's not about putting yourself down, it's not about why didn't I know this, but instead being able to be grateful and comfortable in the fact that maybe you didn't know something, or you had never considered something, and now you can.
I believe that you said it, and we say it when we start this program: how to recognize it, how to name it, and how to heal from trauma. I think not everybody comes from the same type of home. Not everybody has the privilege of knowing what trauma was, or being able to name it and recognize it. I think sometimes families and people just live in trauma, and that's just life. That's just how you live. You don't see it as trauma, you just see it as your life. And I think that having this time to talk about this and explore it, and as you said, Mara, not even to the depths that we could explore it, but just to be able to hear these things maybe we haven't. I think that is helpful for us to be able to go into the homes and have an understanding of people, and not go in there judgmentally and say, you know, and maybe have an understanding that this family, with all of its mixture of things, is not what I've been used to. But you know, maybe I could understand, or at least try to understand, what life has brought them, and how they see life, and how they're doing life, and how that sometimes collides with the world. And if I can just have an understanding of that, if I can go into the home without judgment, if I can go in the home with my privilege, and be able to see people, just see them and hear them, what have I done for that family? Because sometimes they don't even want you to do anything. They just want to be able to know somebody heard them. Because we have families that we work with, and we walk out of it every day and say, nothing's happening. You know, they didn't take my resources, and we're still in the same place that we were when we first started. But they're still here. They're still here. They may not be taking it all right then, but they're still here. And I, as an advocate, I, as a coach, need to recognize who these people are, where they've come from, what they've been dealing with, and look at it from a different perspective. You talked about that, Mara. Look at it from a different perspective. Don't
Yeah.
bring my stuff in and say, but be able to see them and truly hear them. So then I can go where they are to help them come to where they need to be.
Mhm. And sitting in that discomfort too of where they're at, because that can be uncomfortable, because you think, well, they saw us out, so why aren't we doing the things? But so just being comfortable with that. And I think with the series, FA should take a lot of that from this, that it's not a reflection of you're not good at your job. It's not a reflection of you didn't try hard enough. All of these things we've talked about, burnout, or having to meet them where they're at, and then being comfortable with, just because that's where they're at and you meet them there doesn't mean because you met them there it's time to go. That means you may have to sit there for a while, and that sucks. And that feels like, am I wasting these people's time? And am I what they need? X, Y, and Z. Go on forever with all the thoughts that could bring to yourself. But with this series, there's that emphasis of you're meeting them where they're at, and you can only be where you're at professionally. And it's a two-way street, and it is a compassionate journey. That the family's not walking their own. You're not walking your own. You're very much alongside one another for whatever it may look like.
Well, one last thing, and not beating yourself up because you haven't had to deal with that, because you have had privilege, because this was not your life. You didn't have to worry about things. You didn't have to make excuses for who you were. You didn't have to do all that.
Yep.
Recognizing, though, that you can't bring that into other homes. People did have to do that, where they had to justify being who they were, all of that. But taking that back to your coaches, mental health people, and anybody there who can help you have a bigger worldview, a bigger picture of who you are and how you impact other people, or your who you are and how you didn't have to think about these things, understanding that, and then going into that home and being able to really be that big impact, because you can take care of them because you've taken care of you.
Yep.
Well, I think those are both such beautiful ways to end. And I just really appreciate the conversation that we've had, and both of you welcoming me into this process with you. It's been a lot. I think it's helped me learn too, as I've talked through this family, helped me learn and also just appreciate how critical the role of the FA is, and how critical the work that you all are doing is, and also how challenging, right? So I have a new appreciation, I think, through talking through this case with you both. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Well, this brings us to the end of our 6 topics on trauma. As Mara has said, I think we've all learned something. Just talking to these amazing ladies, I've learned a lot. And I want to say, I've just been so proud to be able to be a family advocate and learn from ground floor up, and to be a coach, and to now see things in a different way, to be that support person. So we want you to take this. We want you to look at all the different resources that Mara will drop into our folder. We want you to be able to talk to each other and really process this. We want to be able to be with you to help you through this, and hear all the things that we talked about before we started recording. So, and anyway, we want to thank you, and thank you, Mara. We hope to do more projects with you. And thank you for tuning in to Coaching Conversations with Patrice and Liz.